Are you ready to hear the story beneath the silence? I bought an old baby monitor and awakened a tragedy from 50 years ago. In the middle of the night, that voice coming from the walkie-talkie. It wasn't talking to my baby, it was talking directly to me. What if the most innocent-looking object in your home turned into a being that knew your deepest secrets and whispered threats to you? What would you do? That second-hand baby monitor I bought was pulling me into a horrific secret that had unfolded in the same house 50 years ago, a secret no one knew about. Moreover, that whisper soon began giving me orders, and the most terrifying part, the owner of that whisper had been hiding within the walls of my home from the very beginning. This video will tell the story of how an ordinary family's life turned into a nightmare through the voice they trusted most. After hearing this story, you'll never dare to use a baby monitor again. It all began 6 months ago when we moved into the house we had always dreamed of. My name is Jack. My wife Emma, our 6-month-old son Jeremy, and I had escaped the hustle and bustle of city life and taken refuge in this 2-story house with a garden where the rustling of leaves and silence reigned supreme. Every corner smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. We had painted Jeremy's room sky blue and drawn clouds and stars on the walls. That room was to be our little paradise, our castle. Everything was perfect, or so we thought. The only thing missing was a baby monitor. Emma had suggested getting the most high-tech one with a camera, but I wanted something more nostalgic. I found it in a corner of a flea market we visited over the weekend. It was a vintage monitor with a wooden case, a cute little bear figure on top, and a cream-colored finish. The old man selling it said,
"They don't make these anymore, sir. It has a crystal clear sound."
At that moment, it looked so innocent, so charming. "If only you had turned around and run away from that stall, Jack," a voice whispers inside me now. If only. The first week was normal. The only sounds coming from the radio were Jeremy's breathing as he slept, and the occasional static crackle. Emma laughed it off, saying,
"That's all you get with this old technology."
But one night, I heard something else amid the static. It was very faint, like a whisper in a dream. I couldn't make out what it was saying. I sat up in bed and nudged Emma. "Did you hear that?" I asked. She looked at me with sleepy eyes.
"What, honey? There's just static."
At that moment, I doubted myself. New fatherhood fatigue, sleepless nights. I convinced myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. That was the first step of the thing. It starts playing with your mind, trapping you in your own doubts. A few nights later, the whisper returned. This time, it was clearer. I was frozen in my bed, holding my breath and listening. It was the voice of a thin, elderly woman, and she whispered,
"Don't let him catch cold."
I froze. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I slowly got out of bed and crept into Jeremy's room. The blanket on him had shifted slightly to the side. I straightened it. His room was warm. He wasn't cold. But that voice, that command, it was so clear. When I told Emma, she laughed again.
Look how nice. We have a ghostly nanny helping us.
But something inside me had snapped. This wasn't a parasite. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an intelligent being, and it was listening to us. For the next week, I tried to hear that sound every night, but I couldn't. I was just starting to relax, to believe that I was really just seeing things from exhaustion when that evening happened. Emma was out of town for work. After putting Jeremy to bed, I was watching a movie in the living room. I locked the door and put the key, as usual, on the console in the living room. The movie ended, and I went to bed. I could hear Jeremy's calm breathing through the baby monitor. Just as I was about to fall asleep, that icy whisper echoed in my mind.
"You left the keys at the door again."
I opened my eyes in horror. I don't remember how I jumped out of bed. I ran down to the living room, and yes, my keys were not on the console but hanging on the lock of the front door. My stomach cramped up. This was impossible. No one could know this. At that moment, I realized that this thing was not only listening, but also seeing. It was somewhere inside the house. That night, I slept with the lights on until morning, holding the largest knife I could find in the kitchen. The next day, I couldn't tell anyone about this incident. They would think I was crazy. Only one thing came to mind. That voice, the old woman's voice. Maybe she was the previous owner of the house. Maybe she had died in this house. I sat down at the computer and started researching the address of the house and its previous owners. After hours of research, I came across a yellowed local newspaper article from 1978. Mother and baby found dead in their home. As I read the article, my breath caught in my throat. The address was my address. An elderly woman named Agnes Gable and her 6-month-old baby had lost their lives in a fire that broke out in the middle of winter, poisoned by smoke. In one detail of the article, it was written that the only thing the firefighters had managed to retrieve almost intact from the rubble was a wooden music box next to the baby's crib. At that moment, my hair stood on end. What if that voice belonged to Agnes? What if her spirit was trapped in this house and thought our baby was her own? The thought was terrifying, but it also offered an explanation. However, what I heard the following night threw all those theories out the window. This time, a lullaby was coming from the radio, a melody I had never heard before. With sad, distorted notes, I immediately recorded it on my phone. With my eyes red from sleeplessness, I searched for that melody in lullaby archives online until dawn. Finally, I found it. It was a forgotten German lullaby from the 19th century. Its name was Komm süßer Tod. Its meaning, come, sweet death. Enough was enough. Whatever this thing was, its intentions were not good. I couldn't live under the same roof as a creature that whispered death lullabies to my son. I told Emma everything. At first she didn't believe me, but when she saw the horror on my face and heard the helplessness in my voice, she took me seriously. We had to get rid of the radio, but simply throwing it away wouldn't be enough. I had to destroy it. Emma took Jeremy and went outside. They left me alone with that thing. I took a hammer and walked toward the bedroom, toward the wooden box on the dresser. Just as I raised the hammer, the voice from the radio wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, angry, and unbelievably close. It spoke as if it were right next to my ear.
If you silence me, I'll talk to him myself.
I paused for a moment before lowering the hammer, and at that moment, a sound came from Jeremy's room, the room where the other part of the walkie-talkie was. It wasn't the sound of crying, it was our baby's laughter. I rushed into the room. Jeremy was sitting in his crib, looking at an empty, dark corner of the room, clapping his hands and giggling joyfully, as if there was something very funny there. At that moment, I understood. That thing no longer needed the walkie-talkie. I broke that wooden box into 1,000 pieces. I put each splinter in a bag and threw it in the nearest trash container. Nothing else happened that night, but we couldn't stay in that house another night. The next morning, we called a truck and packed our lives into boxes and fled that cursed house. We moved into my parents' house. For months, I flinched at even the slightest smile from Jeremy, checking to see if he was staring at the empty corners of the room, but nothing happened. Over time, we returned to normal. We convinced ourselves that the nightmare was over. We moved into a new apartment, a modern, safe building with no history. We didn't bring any of our old belongings with us. We started from scratch. Jeremy is now 1 year old. He walks and speaks a few words. We are happy. But sometimes at night, I see Jeremy playing with his toy phone. He holds the plastic receiver to his ear, and into the silence of the room, into that empty space where no one is, he whispers something in the few words he's learned. Then he stops, tilting his head to the side, as if listening for an answer, and that familiar, innocent smile spreads across his face. And every time, I freeze. My heart starts racing, just like it did in that old house, and I ask myself, who is my son talking to on the phone, and what are they answering him? Now I understand this. Some beings use technology to reach you, while others choose your most loyal friend as their messenger. Just like in the other story I'm about to tell. And now, in another house, another person is about to face the same fear in a similar silence. The corner Max was looking at would change everything. My dog growls at the same corner every night at 3:03 a.m. The dog I adopted from the shelter growls at the same corner of the living room every night at exactly 3:03 a.m. But there is nothing in that corner. What would you do if your newly adopted dog started growling in an empty corner every night at the same time? That's exactly what happened to me 3 weeks after I brought Max home from the shelter. I thought it was just a trauma from his past, until I uncovered the terrifying secret behind the disturbing gifts he started leaving at my back door. This video tells the story of a loyal friend's efforts to protect his owner from the invisible inhabitants of the house. And after hearing this story, you will never forget that your most loyal friend's seemingly meaningless growl may actually be a whispered warning for you. My life before Max was nothing but a quiet noise. My name is Robert. I'm in my 30s and work from home as a graphic designer. My days were spent with pixels and projects, while my nights were filled with the echoes of this large suburban house's empty rooms. Loneliness had become a habit, but one day, I realized that this habit was actually a deficiency. That day, I saw his photo on the local animal shelter's website. Max, 3 years old, a golden retriever mix. His eyes had a sad but hopeful look, as if he carried all the sorrow in the world. His past was described as difficult. That was enough for me. I felt that we could heal each other's wounds. The first day he came home, it was as if he had been living there for years. He was playful, affectionate, and incredibly loyal. The empty house was filled with his cheerful running around and the sound of his paws. My loneliness had given way to unconditional love. Everything was perfect until that night. It was 3 a.m. I woke up to an odd sound, a deep, throaty, suppressed growl. My bedroom door was ajar, and the sound was coming from the living room. I slowly got out of bed. My heart was racing. Had a burglar broken in? When I entered the hall, I saw Max. He was standing there, his body tense like a bow, his fur bristling, staring at that empty corner by the bookcase in the hall. And he was growling. He never took his eyes off that corner for even a moment. "Max," I whispered. "What's wrong, son?" He didn't even hear me. He was completely fixated on that empty space. I turned on the light. There was nothing in the corner, just the wall and the parquet floor. I went over to Max and stroked him. His body was trembling. "It's okay. Calm down. It was just a bad dream." But I knew he wasn't dreaming, that he was awake. That night, I saw it as part of the process of getting used to his new home. But this wasn't a one-time occurrence. It became a ritual. Every night, at exactly 3:03 a.m., Max would wake up, go to the living room, and start growling at that corner. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Its precision was as accurate as an alarm clock. This situation turned the event into more than just a simple trauma response. It was an appointment. Every night at 3:03 a.m., Max would meet an invisible presence in that corner. I couldn't sleep at night anymore. As 3 o'clock approached, my anxiety grew, and I couldn't take my eyes off the clock. At 3:02, I heard Max stirring restlessly in his bed. At 3:03, the growling began. This situation was driving me mad. Were we alone in this house, or did we have an invisible guest? I had to put an end to this uncertainty. I ordered a pet camera online. It had night vision and was motion sensitive. I positioned the camera so that it would directly face that cursed corner. "Okay," I said to myself, "this nonsense is over. I'll watch the recording in the morning and see that there's nothing there." The next morning, with bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep and trembling hands, I opened the camera recording on my phone. I fast-forwarded the recording to 3:03 a.m. There it was. Max entered the frame. He turned the corner. He began to growl. For 10 minutes, he growled at the same spot, then calmed down and returned. But at the corner, there was nothing. No shadow, no play of light, no speck of dust. Nothing. I should have felt relieved at that moment, right? But the opposite happened. A deep fear spread through me, deeper than I had ever felt before. Because the camera couldn't see anything, but Max could. This meant that the threat was not only in my imagination, but also existed on a level that technology couldn't detect. After that day, Max's behavior began to change. He wasn't just growling anymore. He started leaving small gifts in front of the glass door leading to the backyard. At first, it was a dead leaf, then a dead mouse. Hunting instinct, I thought. But one morning, I found a single wilted rose in front of the door, clearly plucked from the neighbor's garden. It was not a gift, but an offering. It was an offer of peace. Max was trying to bribe something outside to leave him and me alone. And then, that morning, when I opened the door, I saw that single mud-covered work boot sitting on the doormat. It was an old, worn-out boot. In that moment, I realized that what Max was trying to communicate with wasn't an animal. It was a human, or something that had once been human. My fear had turned into paranoia. Whose boot was it? Where had it come from? Was there a connection to that thing in the corner that Max had been growling at? I needed answers. In desperation, I called the shelter where I had adopted Max. The woman on the phone remembered Max.
Oh yes, Max. That sweet boy. We're so glad you found him a home.
I need to ask you something about his past. Who was his previous owner? Why was he left at the shelter?
We don't usually share that information, sir.
Please, this is important. There are some oddities in his behavior. It might help me understand.
All right. The previous owner was a lonely man named Mr. Arthur Pike. He didn't bring Max to us. The police did. Mr. Pike disappeared from his home about 3 months ago, without a trace. His car, his wallet, everything was still in the house, but he was gone. The police searched for a while, but eventually closed the case. They found Max alone in the house.
Is this in this house?
Yes. According to my records, Mr. Pike's address is the same address you're currently living at.
After hanging up the phone, I stared into space for hours. Arthur Pike, the missing man. He had lived in this house. Did he also hear something growling at 3:03 a.m. every night? Did he also find strange gifts in front of his door? Was he the person Max warned about but couldn't protect? That night, as 3:03 approached, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just watch the camera. No matter what, I was going to see what was in that corner. It was 3:02. Max stirred restlessly. It was 3:03. The growling began. I slowly got out of bed. I picked up my phone and connected to the camera's live feed. On the screen, as usual, was my growling dog in an empty corner. But this time, I wasn't watching to prove something. I was watching to find an anomaly. Without taking my eyes off the screen, I walked toward the living room. When I reached the door of the hall, I noticed something on the screen. The clock is in the lower right corner of the live broadcast. The timestamp, 3:02:59. It was frozen. It wasn't moving. This wasn't a live broadcast. It was a recording that repeated itself every night. It was a loop. At that moment, the other phone in my pocket vibrated. It was my old, unused phone. There was a message on the screen. Unknown number. I opened the message. My heart was pounding in my throat. The camera is a trap. It's a trap that man set up to protect you. Don't look out the real window. He knows he's being watched. My brain throbbed. Arthur Pike. He had set up the camera loop to protect the next tenant, meaning me. But from what? My eyes shifted from the phone screen to the large glass door, leading from the living room to the backyard. And at that moment, I heard a slow, scratching sound coming from the glass, like nails being dragged across it. Max's growl turned into an angry bark. I knew it. It was there, right on the other side of the glass, just a few meters away from me. It was waiting for me to look at it. And in that moment, I realized that the real fear in this house wasn't the invisible presence in the corner. The real fear was the possibility of seeing what that presence looked like. I'm sitting here, in the living room, in the dark. Max, at my feet, is growling towards the door. The screen of my phone glows with that single message, and that slow, patient scratching sound keeps coming through the glass. I don't know how long I can go without looking. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, a dog's growl is everything. But what if there's no one to warn you? What if it's not just you who hears these sounds, but your downstairs neighbor too? The next story starts when a guy who thinks he's living all alone starts to realize maybe he's not as alone as he thought. Someone was making noise in my apartment every night, and it wasn't me. Someone had been living with me in my apartment for months, but I was completely unaware of it. I'm not talking about a roommate or a guest. What if your downstairs neighbor constantly complained about the noise coming from your apartment, but you lived alone and were fast asleep at the times when the noise was coming from your apartment? What would you do? When I moved into my new home, I experienced exactly that. At first, I thought it was just a grumpy neighbor making things up, but when I investigated the truth behind his annoying complaints, I discovered something terrifying that made me question every wall in my home. It all started 2 months ago when I moved into this old but charming apartment. My name is Ethan. I am a freelance scriptwriter who works from home. After living in a noisy and chaotic shared house, the quietness of this old building, with its creaky floors and high ceilings, felt like a palace to me. Finally, I had a place of my own. The first week went smoothly, that is, until I found that passive-aggressive note under my door. It read, in large, scrawled letters, "Please make less noise at night. Some people are trying to sleep." I was surprised. I never stayed awake past midnight. It must be the old plumbing in the building, I thought. The sounds must be mixing. I crumpled up the note and threw it away. A few days later, I ran into her on the stairs. My downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Sophia. She was in her 70s, a small, hunched woman with a perpetually displeased expression on her face. When she saw me, she gave me a sharp look.
"Young people, you have no respect left."
At that moment, I realized the note had come from her. A grumpy old woman, I thought. I didn't give it another thought, but the complaints didn't stop. Now, every time she saw me, she would cut me off and start detailing my noises from the previous night.
"Last night at around 3 o'clock, you were walking around the whole house in those heavy boots again. The ceiling of my room was shaking."
"Mrs. Sophia," I said patiently, "I don't walk around the house in shoes, and I was asleep at that hour." She looked at me with disbelieving eyes.
Sure,
she said, and walked away grumbling. This situation was frustrating. I was constantly being accused of something I hadn't done in my own home. But the worst part was that I slowly began to doubt myself. Was I sleepwalking? Was I getting up at night without realizing it and wandering around the house? This thought bothered me so much that one night I placed a chair in front of my bedroom door. If I got up, I would knock over the chair and wake up. When I woke up in the morning, the chair was still there. But that day, Mrs. Sophia knocked on my door. Her face was angrier than usual.
"Your guests last night were just as disrespectful as you,"
she shouted.
"I listened to your laughter and conversations until morning. Enough is enough."
I was stunned. That night, I was completely alone at home. I had no guests. I had even watched a silent movie with headphones on. What guests? I stammered. I was alone last night. Mrs. Sophia laughed mockingly.
"Don't lie to me, young man. I heard it with my own ears. There was a man's voice and a woman's voice."
I slammed the door in her face. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was impossible. That woman must be crazy. But what if she wasn't? What if she really did hear those sounds? Then that meant that the source of those sounds was my apartment, but that I wasn't the one making them. This thought sent a cold fear through my veins. After that night, I listened intently to every sound in my home. Every creak, every click made me jump out of my skin. And then, one night, I heard it too. I was reading my book in my bedroom. The house was completely silent. And then, from the living room, on the other side of the house, I heard a distinct sound. It sounded as if someone had dragged a wooden chair about an inch across the parquet floor. I froze where I stood. This sound wasn't coming from the building's plumbing. This sound was coming from my living room, and I wasn't in the living room. I slowly got out of bed. I picked up the heavy lampshade from the nightstand. Was there a thief? I quietly slipped into the hallway and peeked through the living room door. No one was there, but one of my chairs had been slightly pulled away from the table. That night, I realized I was a stranger in my own home. Now I needed proof. I had to prove that I wasn't crazy. The next day, I ordered a small night vision security camera online. Before going to bed that night, I placed the camera on top of the bookcase in the living room, out of sight, so that it could see the entire room. I closed the door to my bedroom and didn't sleep a wink until morning. The next morning, with trembling hands, I connected to the camera recording on my phone. I started watching the recording. Hours of emptiness in fast-forward mode. Just the faint movement of dust on the furniture. Just as I was about to relax and say, "See, it was all in my head," that moment came. At the 3rd hour and 22nd minute of the recording, a movement appeared on the screen. The door of that large, old, built-in wardrobe in the living room slowly opened, and someone emerged from inside. My heart nearly stopped. It was a weak, tall figure, completely concealing its face with a hood. It was not my footsteps. It was in my home, while I was asleep, moving about as if it owned the place. He pulled up one of the chairs in the living room and sat down at my desk. He sat there for a while, as if waiting for someone. Then he got up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator door to look inside. This was concrete evidence. I wasn't going crazy. Someone else was wandering around my house while I was asleep. But how had they gotten in? My windows were barred. My door was locked. I continued watching the footage. The man came out of the kitchen and walked back toward the closet. He went inside and closed the door, but he hadn't left. I rewound the recording over and over. The man was coming out of the wardrobe, but he was never entering from anywhere else. The point of entry and exit was always the same place, that large, old, built-in wardrobe in the corner of the living room. I never liked that wardrobe. The landlord hadn't removed it because it was an original part of the building. I ran to the wardrobe. I opened the doors. It was empty inside. I felt the back panel with my hands. It seemed solid. But then, at the very bottom, where it joined the carpet, I noticed something strange. The bottom of the panel wasn't completely attached to the wall. I pulled the panel toward me with all my strength. Accompanied by the smell of dusty, rotten wood, the panel came loose. There was no wall behind it. Behind it was a pitch-black, narrow void. Perhaps it was the old, forgotten service corridor of the apartment building. And on the floor of that void were fresh, muddy footprints leading inward toward my apartment. At that moment, I heard Mrs. Sophia banging on the ceiling from the floor below.
Enough! Stop that noise already!
I called the police. I showed them the video recording in the secret passage behind the wardrobe. They investigated. They discovered that the passage led all the way down to the unused coal cellar of the apartment building and had a rusty door leading outside that no one knew about. It was clear that someone had been using that passage to come in and out of my house for months, but they couldn't figure out who it was. They sealed the passage and locked the wardrobe. After that, I moved to the other side of the country and have been living in studio apartments ever since. The thought of living in a big house with all those rooms, corners, and places to hide now really freaks me out. Did you notice something common in all three stories? Threats always come from unexpected places and in unexpected ways. A baby monitor, a loyal dog, a grumpy neighbor. Have you ever had a moment in your life that seemed innocent at first, but later gave you the creeps? Share your most unsettling stories in the comments, and maybe we'll feature your story hidden beneath the silence in our next video.